Love, love, until I feel the breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Hello. Welcome to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Shirley Baskett. She has experienced same-sex attraction and would like to share her story. Welcome, Shirley.
Thanks, Geraldine.
It's great to have you on our show.
Thanks.
And I'd like to ask you, about your story of how it all began.
Yeah, sure. Actually, it began quite strangely because I was in a Bible college when I was around about 19, 20, and while I was there, I had these really strong feelings for another woman, and I didn't really think that anything was going to happen with that, but it was very confusing to me. However, it was much more confusing when I ended up going into my first relationship with this woman on my graduation night from that Bible college. It's not something I'd planned, but it was something that happened. And so that was when it really began for me, and it was a very, very confusing thing because I was a Christian and I had a very strong understanding of the Bible and what I felt the Bible said. But these feelings were so strong, and so I entered into that relationship then.
Did you have these feelings when you were younger?
I did, but I guess I didn't really recognise that too much until I looked back. A long time later, when I was pretty much given over into that whole identity of being lesbian, I would look back and then see that through my childhood I'd had crushes on other women, or on women, that is. I'd had feelings for other girls, but I guess back then I just thought, oh, this is a phase that everybody goes through. But looking back, I realised that no, that's why I probably felt very different from other girls. So, yeah.
And how did you feel about having these feelings? How did that fit in with your church at the time?
Well, at the time, I didn't really sort of know that it was something different. When I was a youngster, I just thought as it was that it was some kind of phase. I always had very strong, kind of emotionally dependent friendships, especially with one very close friend. But a lot of girls did, so it wasn't that noticeable then.
Yes.
And I did, as I went into my teens, I did have boyfriends, and so I wasn't thinking that I was necessarily just in that direction, if you like. And back in those days when I was younger, not many people really talked about same-sex attraction or homosexuality. It was a very taboo sort of subject, especially amongst Christians. So I kind of thought that I would just go through life and meet a man that I would love, marry, and live what was kind of considered a normal Christian life. However, that didn't work out for me because boyfriends didn't really work out for me, and I never quite understood men. And some of the relationships that I did have probably endorsed to me bad negative thoughts that I had about males. And at the same time, deep down, I really wished that I was a male, so I had a kind of a gender dysfunction as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you stay with the church?
No, I didn't. After the Bible college, what happened was that I went into this relationship. I felt that it was wrong as a Christian, but the feelings were so compulsive and so strong, and I felt that this was love, that somehow maybe God had made a mistake, that perhaps he'd put a man into a rather short womanly body, and I thought that I couldn't change. I began to hear people say that if you have these feelings, you are gay, and that you are born this way, that you cannot change. So I began to think that there was no way I could fight it. That relationship actually broke up very quickly. It broke up within a year or so, a bit of a longer story than that. And I was devastated and broken-hearted. But by then I believed that this is where I belonged, that this was who I was, that this is where my intense feelings were, that I was lesbian, that I couldn't change. So the only way I was going to be happy was to find another Miss Perfect. And so I pursued that. But at the same time, I couldn't pretend that I was really doing right by God. And so I did leave the church at that time. I also realised that I'd lost my relationship with God too. That seemed very clear to me. I always felt I had a very strong relationship with God, and that's what brought me back, actually.
Yes. How did you come back to the church?
Okay, well, when I was around about 28, I began to look at what my future was going to be, and I hadn't found Miss Perfect. I'd had quite a few relationships. I'd been very, very much in the life that I was in, and probably spent most of my time with women for quite a number of years, apart from in business when I was working. But I was looking at what my friends did, and some of them were settling into long-term relationships, maybe bringing up children together. But it seemed to me not quite the way I would want it to be. I'd kind of remembered what it was to be a Christian and what real Christian relationships could look like. Some of my friends, like me, hadn't found this wonderful partner, and some were wanting to just drink themselves to death. I was already on my way to doing that. And some were just going into a very lonely period of time in their lives. So I thought at that time, I haven't found this person. In fact, I got to the point where I couldn't really trust love anymore, because when I did love somebody, it didn't work out. And so I couldn't go on having my heart crushed. But I thought, well, if I can't find love with a man and I can't find love with a woman, I may as well just be logical about it and jump off the harbour bridge where I was living.
Wow.
And I wasn't feeling miserable, by the way. It was just, this is logical. I don't want to go into this future that doesn't look very positive to me. And so I was thinking about that. But I realised not everybody dies when they jump off harbour bridges. Sometimes they just break every bone in their body. I'm not into pain. And so I remembered that God was maybe there. And so I prayed a last prayer. And I said, well, look, if you're out there, God, and if I can get back to you, if you show me that, then you'll give me the power to walk in your ways. And if you show me that, I will come back to you full on, and I will follow you for the rest of my days. So I prayed that prayer, and that very night I went home. I was living on my own in an inner city suburb, and a man came around and knocked on the door, and he was somebody that I'd known way back when I was a youngster in a church setting. In fact, I'd kind of done the hippie Jesus freak thing when I was younger, and so it was from that time period. And he was standing on my doorstep, and he said, I've come to see you. And so to me it was like, maybe God's reaching out to me.
Yeah, no, your story is very inspiring. And we need to go for a break now.
Yeah, sure.
You've been watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us, and we'll be back after the break. Hello, welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Shirley Baskett. She's been sharing about her same-sex attraction and how that led her away from the church, but then back to the church.
Yeah.
Hi, Shirley.
Hi.
You've been sharing, it was very inspiring, but you did make that prayer at the harbour bridge when you were thinking of ending your life. Yeah,
that's right. I was thinking about it, and so I prayed a last prayer, and a man came round that I'd known when I was younger, and I wondered why he was coming, because I'd only lived in that place a short time, and so how did he know I was living there? And then he explained to me that my mother and my sister had rung the church to say, could somebody come around and see their daughter, my sister. And I thought that was rather amazing, because for one thing, my mother didn't like that particular church, and so that was a big miracle for a start. And she also didn't know my life, what I was doing. I'd managed to hide my same-sex relationships from my parents because I didn't want to hurt them. But my sister did know, and so she'd rung the church, and she'd got hold of a young pastor there who'd asked this man to come. So I felt that I had my answer from God, that he was reaching out to me, because it was that very night I'd prayed the prayer saying, God, if you're there, please show me. And so he was also a very, very humble, gentle man. So he was the right person to come to me. And he knew all the things about my life from when I'd walked away, basically, through that time. So I was able to confess to him something much deeper than my same-sex attraction and the acting out that I'd done there. My real thing was that I had run away from God, because I didn't trust him through fear, and I didn't trust that God had his best will for me, basically. So I wouldn't obey God. I obeyed my feelings instead, if that makes some sense there.
Yes.
So I was able to actually confess that, because really my sin was really rebellion. It wasn't so much the symptoms, which were the relationships that I'd had. And so that night I decided that if God was going to reach out to me in that way, I was going to follow him then for the rest of my days. I didn't think that I could change. I still believed that I was gay at that time, but I was going to be God's celibate gay, and that's how I was going to live from then on.
Yeah. And was there any kind of repentance? The repentance was about you.
Absolutely, Geraldine.
Being rebellious. Is that what
it was? But I also knew that my way of life was not the way of life that God intended. The Bible seemed very clear to me. So I knew what I had to do, and I knew that I had to walk away from living that way. So that was a very difficult thing to do at the time, because, as I say, I did not think that I would ever be able to love a man. So I was looking at walking with God, walking away from my homosexual behaviour, walking away from most of my friends. Not that I really chose to do that, because I loved my friends. I wanted them to know Jesus too. And so, I wasn't saying I'm just going to completely cut off all those people, they're bad people. I loved those people. And but I knew that I couldn't live that way anymore. So that was the repentance, turning from what I was doing to turning toward God. So remorse, probably there wasn't a lot of remorse at that point. It was more a sense of, okay, I'm going to do this with God's power, because I can't do it myself. And God certainly reached out to me, and I didn't think that I'd ever feel any great joy. I thought I'm just going to suffer my way through life. But God had different plans for that. He certainly filled me with a joy, because I didn't come back to the church or to God to go straight. I didn't come back because I wanted to be heterosexual. What I came back for was that I wanted my relationship back with Jesus. That's the thing I missed the most. So in some ways what happened was I reconnected vertically, if you like, to God, and then I let him do whatever he wanted to. For once I was going to give him my will instead of clashing with his will. So,
and how does the idea, which is very much in the in the news about the genes of homosexuality being a genetic thing?
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, I believe that I was born gay, and so I believe that it must be genetic. But I've read an enormous amount since, and I do not believe that. I do not believe that I was born gay. From what I understand from the things that I've read, there may be some biological influences. For example, the whole science of epigenetics, which is just being looked at the moment, which can have markers on a person in their genes that come actually from behaviour from other ancestors or their thoughts or whatever. I mean, I'm a lay person, I'm not a scientist, but there could be something there. Sometimes it's personality, and those sorts of things come into it, but they have mapped the human genome, and there is no actual gay gene, no matter how many people say that. But I believe that it is a mixture of some things that could be biological, personality, maybe body frame, being sensitive, but also development.
Oh, yes. And what about, they say a lot of people with same-sex attraction have had sexual abuse. Is that true?
Yeah, well, a higher proportion have, but that's not necessarily always there. But there are components that are very common. And I've now spent a lot of time with a lot of people who we would probably more identify ourselves as post-gay, and because we walked away from our homosexuality. And the common factors that are there from development do seem to be very pronounced. And I know a lot of people say all those things are sort of debunked today. Actually, there's so many common threads through stories. And for women, a lot of it, most of the women I know have had some kind of difficulties with their relationship with their mother. And often that can be, perhaps mum was perceived as weak and they didn't want to be like that, or mum might have been very strong. So, I mean, there's no ABC in this, but there are certainly common things that come through. For me, My mother was a very, very strong personality, and she was also grieving because I had a brother who died when he was 12, and the circumstances of his death were pretty traumatic. So I didn't want to grieve like her all my life. So if that was what it was to be a woman, I didn't want to be that.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and thank you for sharing so deeply about, you know, your life, and I'd like to hear more about it after the break. You've been watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us and we'll be back after the break.
Go till I feel much breath of the Spirit flowing in me. Blow, blow, go till I feel much breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Hello, welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Shirley Baskett. She's been sharing her story of same-sex attraction and how she came back to her faith in God. Hi, Shirley.
Hi.
We were talking a lot about the theories of your opinion of why people have same-sex attraction.
Yeah.
Would you like to continue? You were wanting to share about the father experience.
Yeah, well, I think both parents really have impact on children. In my case, I mean, I can really only tell my own story because I've discovered everybody has completely different journeys in this way. And even the official people who put out the statements about what causes homosexuality all agree that it can be a combination of things. Maybe some biological influence, not genetic, but also especially how you grow up and the experiences that you have in your life that imprint on you. So it's a neurological sort of thing, I think. And a lot of it can come down to your parents. In my case, I can only really look at my story where my mother, I basically rejected her because she was always in grief and in depression, which was not her fault. I hadn't attached to her as a baby because of things she was going through at the time. So I had a longing for a woman's love, if you like, that was imprinted in me. But my father was a very gentle and a very philosophical man, but also a very detached man. And so he didn't really give me much as I grew up as a child about what it was to be a female, how to relate to men, what men were really about, because he was so emotionally detached. But he was also the person that I would rather be. He was a businessman. He was a very lovely person and a very academic sort of man. And so I wanted to model after him. So I can see the influences on my own life as I look back and unpack that. But of other women, I know their stories are completely different sometimes. Yes. And they maybe were very close to their mother, but felt they had to look after their mother. So when they got into their teens, they felt like it's my turn for a woman to love me. Now, these are not conscious things that you go through your life thinking, you know, these are the things that have happened to me. They just happen. And so what happens is you end up having these strong feelings, this need for a woman's love.
Yes. And how did you, with all that, what happened with you meeting your husband? And
yeah, because that brings into the thing of, well, what happened to me? Did I instantly become heterosexual? No would have to be the answer there. And I think this whole issue of can people change their orientation, I'm not even keen on that word orientation, because that brings in again the thought that somebody is born that way and can't change. But we now know that sexuality is so much more flexible than people can think. In fact, there's been a lot of research done on this by people, for example, like Lisa Diamond, who's a lesbian researcher in the USA at Utah University, and she puts out some very interesting material about how people do actually change, sometimes just very naturally, and it's always from same-sex attraction toward heterosexuality. Well, we can think that's crazy, but the science is telling us that that's the case. For me, I didn't think that I would ever have feelings for a man, but very early on, when I came back to Jesus, I started going to a small church group, a midweek group, and a young man came in who was a lot younger than me, and he started pursuing me, and I thought, you know, you'll need to get over this because I'm older than you for a start. And so I kind of tried to not give him any messages, and I thought, and then in the end I told him my story about how I was lesbian and that I didn't have feelings for men. Well, he just kept pursuing me in a loving sort of way, and he had God on his side. And in the end, I actually got to know him so well that I couldn't do without him in some ways. And so we first became hard and fast friends. And then I felt through many things that maybe this was something God was doing. And I loved him at that time. I'd already begun to love him, but I didn't have those huge sparky feelings. But I felt that it was right that God wanted us to be together. So I actually married him sort of by obedience to God, if you like. And he's been an amazing partner. I'm not saying God said, you must marry this man. I chose to marry him. But the feelings did come, Geraldine.
Oh, you got the attraction.
I did start getting some attraction. And I think now I understand that part of this was because the Bible tells us to bring every thought into the captivity of Christ. And I'd already been doing that. And so I thought, well, if I'm marrying this man, I have to choose to love him. And so what I'd do was I would look and I would think, oh, he's got beautiful blue eyes. He's got a nice face. Actually, he's a really good-looking man, and he is a good-looking man. I actually didn't notice that for 2 years.
Yes.
But as I began to feed those thoughts into my mind, I think I was beginning new neural pathways because they did start to spark.
Like an acquired taste?
Perhaps it was like that. And
you know, when you first drink beer, you hate it, but if you keep drinking it, you love it.
I think that is the case. I did make him grow his hair long. He was a punk. He was a punk rocker drummer. And so when I met him, he had his hair all shaved, pretty short anyway. And so I made him grow his hair really long, and he grew it really long so he could almost sit on it. And then I worried and thought, am I trying to turn him into a girl? But Pete's no way a girl. He's a very mannish man.
Yes.
And he's been a wonderful, wonderful marriage partner to me. But he chose to love me too, and he had to put up with a lot. He called our courtship The Taming of the Shrew, so that might give you a bit of an idea.
And you wrote a book about your life.
Yes, my story came out. It was called The Woman Who Outran the Devil. So I'm not a runner, and I know I didn't really outrun the devil. God actually rescued me. But at one point, well, I tell a story in the book anyway. But
so it's The Woman Who Outran the Devil.
Yeah.
Wow. And you got a picture. I've seen the book, and it's got a picture of your hair. Your hair's a bit wild.
That's right. It still is wild, isn't it?
Yes. Oh, it's been a wonderful story about that. And have you? What about your family? Are they accepting of your situation?
My mother never knew. She died before I ever had to tell her. But when the book came out, I had to tell my father. And he was very gracious because he'd actually been away from God too, and he came back to Jesus at the age of 84.
Wow.
And so we had some wonderful time of healing through those years that he was alive. But you mentioned before too about change, and can people change? You know, I think that's an important question.
Yes, but I think your main focus has been to come to Jesus, and that's the main
right,
focus.
Exactly. And
you've got so much wisdom and so much to hear about. We'd love to have you for our show next week. Would you be able to come back?
Thanks. Yeah, I'd love to do that, Geraldine.
Oh, that's fantastic. You've been watching Spirit of Life. See you next week. Goodbye, and God bless you.